Hello again and welcome. This is PNN, your Polandball News Network. Now, I hate mincing words, so let's get right into this week's top news. Last week, President Biden proudly claimed he personally pressured the president of Mexico to open its border with Gaza to humanitarian aid. Now, most pundits have their fingers crossed he confused Mexico for Egypt. Israel didn't find this as funny as they did inspiring. Our sources close to the Israeli government say they're already drafting plans for a new border wall paid entirely by Mexico. This memory debacle has once again sparked debate over Biden's fitness for the presidency. The administration is working tirelessly to dispel rumors that he is suffering from, at this point, the on-time onset of dementia. Just in case though, they have contacted the Jim Henson Company to engineer an identical Muppet replacement of the spunky 81-year-old. On the other side of the political aisle, well, an aisle doesn't seem that wide. Let's say the other side of the political Mordor. Donald Trump is also fighting off claims of mental ineptitude. Unfortunately, he has said so much crazy shit over the years, it's hard to tell what is the degradation of the mind and what is the more acceptable degradation of the soul. For the time being, both men are holding it together enough to pass the incredibly low bar of qualifying for office. President Andrew Johnson proved you didn't need a brain to hold office in 1865, and Woodrow Wilson proved that you didn't need a heart or soul in 1913. At this rate, the November election will come down to the demented versus dementia. Once we find out who Trump picks for vice president, we can assess who will most likely be serving out most of the next 4 years. Only in countries that have dictators or royal families do you see 77-year-olds and older as head of state. I know America scores in the middle of the pack of the democracy index with fellow flawed democracies like Botswana and Slovenia, but come on, isn't there anyone with a heart rate in the double digits here? Obama, Bush Jr., and Clinton are all younger than Trump or Biden. When Reagan ran for the election in 81, people rose a stink about him being too old at a reasonably spry 69. It's safe to say that if the presidency was held to the same anti-doping standards as the Olympics, both would be disqualified for office instead of just Trump. Hell, the two of them are pumped full of so much blood thinner that their veins and arteries are two-dimensional at this point. I personally like the idea of politicians having to pace themselves with advertisements for their major donors just like NASCAR. I also think they should do the same thing with the medications they're on. There's Trump in the number 2 Ozempic card trying to overtake Biden in the Donepezil-mobile. It's gonna be a tight finish. Oh, what's this? Out of nowhere, it's Kamala Harris on foot fueled by pure Adderall. But don't worry, she has a prescription for it.
On Friday, Alexei Navalny, among the most outspoken and high-profile opponents of Russian President and all-around dickhole Vladimir Putin, died in his Siberian prison at the age of 47. Russian officials claimed he fell ill while on a walk around the prison, although our analysts believe it's more likely that he fell ill while being shot in the head or falling out of a 10-story window. While Navalny was far from being the liberal beacon of hope for a nation determined to wallow in never-ending misery and apathy, he was still eminently murderable.
Poland is here for you with weatherings this week. East Lansing, Michigan, United States of America. Monday and Tuesday is cold and clouds with parts of sun in your face. Wednesday and Thursday also cold and is entirely you are in cloud. Friday is be colder with parts of sun. Saturday is mostly cloud and makes sun angry. Sunday is very bit more warmings, but with sun only in part. Back for studios.
There's been a big update lately regarding the war in Ukraine that has left many with divided opinion. Valerii Zaluzhnyi, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, has been sacked, canned, fired, whatever you want to call it, he's gone. Zaluzhnyi had been put in charge of the Ukrainian army in June of 2021, which means he has led them throughout the entire Russian invasion of their country up until this point. As such, he is credited with a lot of their successes in the defense against the Russians, especially in the opening year of the war. As commander-in-chief of the army, Zaluzhnyi had been celebrated for bringing the military to adopt more modern NATO tactics and leadership standards as opposed to the old clunky Soviet way of doing things. Naturally, all of these accolades have made him quite popular, even to the point that he scored an 87% approval rating in a poll. I remember back in school getting an 87% would be a solid A, so to score that high as a public figure is incredibly impressive. That's the kind of approval rating Putin rigs polls to achieve. I imagine he was really jealous about that. So, with all of this in mind, you can easily assume that many in Ukraine were more than displeased with the decision to fire Zaluzhnyi. So all of this begs the question, why was he fired? Well, the most obvious answer is that it is common to replace military leaders as wars rage on, and there have been many significant examples of this in history. For instance, General Friedendahl getting replaced by George Patton in World War II. Or how about this? The famed General Douglas MacArthur getting replaced in the midst of the Korean War despite his famous World War II feats. Safe to say, this is not a rare situation at all. On the other hand, I cannot ignore the rumors about a rift between President Zelensky and General Zaluzhnyi that could have played a part in this, with with the former accusing the latter of meddling in politics, which is a big no-no as far as I have heard. Moreover, there are also rumblings about how the two had disagreements on how to run the war, with one example being that Zelensky wanted Ukraine's highly anticipated summer counteroffensive to be a strong punch, using the NATO-donated vehicles in a singular area on the front line. However, Zaluzhnyi instead decided to focus the attack on multiple fronts. Seeing how the counteroffensive failed to achieve any of their objectives, it is safe to say that Zaluzhnyi is getting the blame for that one. Okay, so now it's the prize-winning question. I bet you're all wondering who's going to replace Zaluzhnyi. Well, that will be Commander Alexander Syrskyi, known to his soldiers as the Butcher, and they do not name him this out of love. So, before we start the slander, let's take a quick look at Syrskyi's achievements, shall we? Well, for one, he commanded the successful defense of Kiev in the opening of the war, which stopped Russia dead in their tracks. He also commanded the lightning Kharkiv counteroffensive, which took back 12,000 square kilometers of land and more than 500 settlements in just under 4 weeks. That one was truly impressive. So, you're probably wondering, why do so many of his soldiers hate him? Remember when I said that Zaluzhnyi was appreciated for getting rid of that old clunky Soviet way of doing things? Well, Syrskyi is accused of doing those clunky Soviet things. And you know what that means? Attrition, attrition, attrition. Alexander Syrskyi is credited for leading the defense of Bakhmut, the 9-month-long battle where both Russia and Ukraine lost significant numbers of soldiers fighting for the city. Zaluzhnyi is reported as having wanted to retreat from the city, whereas Zelensky and Syrskyi wanted to use the battle as a means to sap the Russian forces. This strategy worked to an extent, but it came at great cost. Ukraine lost Bakhmut in the end, and tens of thousands of soldiers on top of it, some that were reserved for the failed summer counteroffensive. Whether or not the Ukrainian soldiers who claim Syrskyi is a butcher are correct remains to be seen. But with an order coming down from Zelensky to avoid stagnation on the front lines at any cost, we're about to find out. In other Ukrainian news, we have received dire news from the eastern region, in the Donetsk Oblast. The Ukrainian stronghold city of Avdiivka has fallen. The city of Avdiivka had been on the front line of the Russo-Ukrainian war since its true starting date in 2014. In the initial fighting early 9 years ago, pro-Russian separatists had tried and failed to seize Avdiivka, and since then it's sat, staring at Russian lines. Even in the renewed Russian offensives and their 2022 invasion, Avdiivka was a tough nut to crack since the Ukrainians had been building it into a fortified stronghold for nearly a decade. It took more than 2 years of heavy fighting for Avdiivka to fall after getting encircled by the Russian forces in a giant cauldron. The Ukrainians held the Russians off for months as the invaders tried to separate the lone road into Avdiivka, which was known as the Road of Life. It was only a week ago that the Russians finally managed to take that road, severing Ukraine from much-needed supplies. With this development on the battlefield, they decided it was time to withdraw their forces. The Ukrainian government says that the battle was a worthwhile attempt to drain the Russian forces, just as they had done earlier in the year in the Battle of Bakhmut. However, knowing that the Ukrainian forces also take great casualties in these battles, one must ask how many more Bakhmuts and Avdiivkas they have left in them. All we can say is now that America has fallen, Ukraine's future may be hanging by a thread. However, there may be hope on the horizon as Ukraine's army is making some very major changes. With that, we'll sign off for the week. As always, thank you for tuning in as we very much appreciate your support. This is PNN, your Polandball News Network. Bye for now.